Hi juniors, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit. I've heard several things going on within your class and I wanted to address you regarding some feedback for you. First of all, we had a test on Tuesday and I heard from Mrs. Anderson even before the end of class that there was some chatter and there were some kids who were a little annoyed. And I looked at your results and I think I have some valid feedback for you. First of all, I want to remind you to study. We spent part of Monday studying, and you could have spent part of Monday night studying. Question for you is to consider how you study. If you are a person who just looks over their terms, that might not have been enough. You had in your notebook and in your book several poems we'd looked at where we had annotated those. That would have been a great thing to look over as well. It may have been a great idea to actually practice annotating a poem because you knew that a portion of the exam would include annotations and what that might include. It's important before you take a test, since you knew what was going to be on that test, that I had told you it would be multiple choice or matching and that there would be annotations, that you consider that and you take that advice. Some students I'd spoken with said that they studied for like 3 to 5 minutes. My question for that is it effective? What are you doing? How can you study more effectively for you? My second piece of advice for you is to slow down. When you rush something, it usually shows. So I want you to slow down and I want you to read whenever you're taking a test, whether it's my class or the ASVAB or the ACT or SAT or a test for another class as well. I want you to slow down and I want you to read. I want you to read those directions carefully. And I want you to read all parts of the questions. On this poetry exam, I noticed that of the 35 juniors, 16 of those juniors spent less than 15 minutes on that exam, and the exam was only 22 questions. But portions of that exam were examples, and you had a poem. Now, it took us usually 15 to 20 minutes in class to read a poem and work through it and annotate it. If you are one of those students who took less than 15 minutes, my question for you is, did you read each question carefully? Did you read and reread each example and each poem carefully? Or did you just glance through it and make assumptions along the way? Of those 16 students who took 15 minutes or less, about a dozen of them were 10 minutes or less. That's about 25 seconds, 25, maybe 30 for each question because you had 22 questions. That means that those students did not take time to read each part carefully. You really do need to do that. You had an hour of time available to you. Use that. Use that wisely. This was not a time test, so you could have used all class hour, and that was fine, and that's what I expected. So I was a little shocked to see several students took 10 minutes or less on their exam. Let me talk about the next topic with you. It's anxiety. The junior class, I've watched you since you were freshmen and sophomores and juniors. Each class kind of had its own attitude about different things. Your class struggles with this, with anxiety. This is something we work on extensively in speech class, but I want to give you a few tips here. First of all, tell yourself that you can do something. If you tell yourself that you can't do something before you even approach it, you're going to end up having a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's what your results are going to be. You're not going to be successful with that because you've talked yourself out of it. Even if you know the material, that can happen to people. When you're answering questions, if you are someone who has taken the time and read through things, those things, first off, help you reduce your anxiety, but also some people second guess themselves and they change their answers several times before they submit an exam. Well, if you're taking the time to study, And if you're taking the time to read carefully, usually your gut instinct on a question will be your best answer. So if you are someone who consistently changes your answers because you're anxious about something, you might want to stop and think about that. Second time, take your time. I've already mentioned to slow down several times, but be smart with how you use time. That can help reduce your anxiety. The final word for anxiety today, because you're all working with me in speech class this year as well, is that, keep your score private. And that deals with our next topic and our final topic as well, rumors and how they start. I've heard several things this week from your class, and almost all of the things I've heard come down the pike were false. And those are rumors, and we need to ask ourselves how those start. Well, I saw one student going from student to student asking what score they got. Well, first of all, that's a breach of privacy, but also that really makes people anxious. That's not information that is available to you, that is appropriate for other people to give you. And if you are one of those people who is constantly asking your classmates what their score is, then you are setting up a tone of competition among your class. And that can be very, very detrimental to your classmates. It can make them extremely anxious, and it can make them feel like they are being judged more than they really are. And you make people feel guilty that way. Oftentimes when people do that, they may give you information that they think you want to hear rather than what's actually true. Or they may misconstrue information. So some of the things I've heard this week have been completely off base. If you are someone who is concerned about a grade, whether it's on a test or an assignment, whether it's in this class or another class, then the person you need to be speaking to is your teacher. Now, if you finish that exam and you did your best and you took what you considered to be a legitimate amount of time, which I'm looking at and saying there's 22 questions, so a legitimate amount of time should have been at least 20-25 minutes or more. Then the first thing you need to do is the next day when I got back, say, hey, Miss Lampert, I don't feel well. I know that Schoology gave me my score here. I haven't seen the results yet. Can we sit down and talk about that? And I'm perfectly willing to have that conversation, but it is not appropriate for a student to say, I don't feel good about it, and then go ask everybody else, and then come up with false information and start spreading that information around. Your score is between you and me and your parents. And you know what? If you come talk to me about it right away, we can do something about it. But if you come talk to me after I've released things, after I've released certain information, then we can't do things like repeat the test. But I'm here to help you, and that's my job. Now, the next thing about anxiety and rumors that I want to address is relating to your guest speaker from the other day. Her name was Lisa, and she talked about agency. When Lisa talked about agency, she talked about being your own best advocate. Going and talking to your teacher about something is what we want to see you doing. It helps you because you get the correct information. It helps you because you and your teacher can problem solve and find a solution together. And you learn how to move on from there. Our guest speaker today, his name was Jason, he talked about mistakes and how he appreciates the mistakes he made in his life because they taught him more than his successes have. And if you have trouble on an assignment, remember that that assignment is just a snapshot of you on that day. One assignment rarely makes makes or breaks a grade. And in this case, with the poetry exam, you know, if I were in another school, if I weren't using Schoology, I would have called that a quiz because it was so few questions. That exam is having a minimal amount of impact on your grade. So look at yourself overall and say, okay, where have I come from? Where have I gone? And is my grade a true reflection of me? And when I post your grades, I look for that. And right now, your grades are a reflection of you, and they're an appropriate reflection of you. And any rumors you hear, think of yourself. Is it true? Well, if it's a rumor, it's probably not. Is it honest? Probably not. And if you want to know about that, talk to your teacher if it involves you. If it involves someone else, acknowledge it's none of your business. So take these lessons and use them and move on from them.